I want to switch gears now, and this is another really big part of the whole ascension discussion that I'm going to, you're going to see how much this factors in. It's a big, big scientific payoff. So let's take a look at fractals now. I'm going to show you some really, really cool stuff. This is the Mandelbrot set. It was discovered by a scientist who was analyzing the behavior of electrical signals in telephone wires. And I believe it was AT&T was trying to figure out why there's static in certain areas of the country in the telephone electrical wiring grid. And he plotted out where the faults were and did it over a huge, huge area. And when he put all that data together, he got this graph. So that has to do somehow with where the static is going and why does it build up in certain places. Then he's walking down the hall where he's working at MIT, and he looks in the window of another room, and on the chalkboard is the same illustration. But in this case, it has to do with the fluctuation between rabbit and fox populations. The rabbits eat the foxes eat the rabbits. Well, no, that's not true. The rabbits don't eat foxes. So it's been a long frickin' weekend, you guys. Wow. Going into a trance state now. Anyway, you know what fractals are. Let's just zoom into that sucker. So there's self-similarity at all levels. This one is fairly good, but this next image that I found is really good. Check this out. So this is some kind of function that just iterates and iterates and iterates. And notice the same image, like right there, boom, there's another one. You zoom in more and more and more, and no matter how far in you go, you keep seeing the same structures, the same patterns repeating again and again and again. And there's no limit to how much you can zoom in. There it is again, boom. And you just keep zooming into the tiniest little portion. And it comes back, and it comes back, and it comes back. So what I'm saying is that you are literally looking at how the universe was created. The universe fractalized out from a singular point. And as you look at this and you see how far fractals can go, it actually starts to make sense that the whole entire universe could be built under a system like this. So what is the original fractal? What is the original form? What is the Mandelbrot set when we look at the universe? Well, one of the keys that helps us is that you can fractalize geometry as well. So we're looking at the example right now with star shapes. And when I trigger this animation, you can see that, in fact, you can fractal out stars. So geometry can do the same thing. You can zoom in indefinitely on geometry, and it'll just give you more and more. So this is my argument, and if you've been following my work, and everybody here has, or at least most of you have, then you know that the sacred geometry has been a big, big part of this. And what I like to obsess on is these 5 forms. The tetrahedron, which if you look up now, there's 4 lights on the wall here, which happen to be tetrahedron lights. So that's really cool. That's one of the things I really like about lecturing in this room. It always kind of reminds me of that. The octahedron, the cube, the icosahedron, and the dodecahedron. Now, these are all fractals of each other. And another way to say that is that they all nest inside of each other. Each one of them grows out of one of the others. And they all grow out of each other. So I'll show you how this works. And it doesn't require any science. It's just a visual that you can see. You can fit a cube and a dodec together. So you got this 5-sided geometry that's light green, and then you got the 8-sided geometry, or the 4-sided per face, with the cube there. So each cube, if you look at the top, you see it looks like a little rooftop, like a little house. You just put a rooftop on each of the faces of the cube, and you're done. You got a dodec, just like that. So now we're going to look at, you can see now how those 2 shapes, cube and dodecahedron, 2 of the 5, they fit together so beautifully. The tetrahedron fits beautifully inside the cube. And here's how that works. Notice that there's no overlap. All you're doing is you're taking 4 of the 8 corners of the cube and connecting the dots together diagonally across the cube face. and you get that tetrahedron, just like we see it in the chandeliers here. And then you can put two of them together, and that makes the Merkaba. And we're going to talk a lot about this in a minute, because this is actually the key to understanding the universe. The Merkaba is everything. Then we can take the octahedron and fit it inside the tetrahedron beautifully by just connecting the dots like we see right here. So that Merkaba has the octahedron inside of it. And then, last but not least, this is the really tricky one, the hardest one to see, is how the icosahedron fits inside the octahedron. This is where you got to kind of do something strange. You can't just bisect the middle now. You got to do it off to the side. So you see now how there's an equilateral triangle on each of the 8 sides of the octahedron, but you'll notice that we're making now this kind of funny triangle inside each face that's sort of offset by what looks like maybe 30 degrees. And you make those offset triangles on each face and then connect the dots, and inside you get this octahedron. So notice also, you can see it here, and you could also see it in the previous illustration, that the geometry tilts. It's like a rotational vortex type of movement. There's a tilt angle on the icosahedron compared to the octa. It goes whoop and goes off to the side. Here's another visualization of it, another way that we can see this. The icosahedron inside the octahedron. So then again, here's that little weird triangle that I said is offset. And the funny part is that you get this classic ratio. And you all are so cool, I don't even need to say it. It's the Fibonacci.
Doorways, megalithic.
I have no words. Apparently, no words. I guess these wireless mics broadcast really well, but since I'm not wireless, we can just mute that wireless mic on the mixing board, and hopefully that will solve the problem, because we're getting interference from somebody else's wireless mic. I think that's what it is, which shows the energy is really good out here. It's broadcasting over quite a long distance. So look, all it is you take the length of the entire side, that's a 1. You take the length of where the sacred cut is, right? And that's a 0.618. That's your Fibonacci, your golden mean. So all of these things that are the regulation of life and growth and development, it's written right into the geometry itself, which that, to me, just really trips me out and is very, very cool. Okay. Now, last but not least, the dodeca and the icosahedron, that's an easy one. Because really, it's just flipping it inside out. You can see it very clearly how well they fit together. There's a pentagonal theme in both. And it works, and it fits, meshes very, very nicely. And we see, in this illustration, just another example of the same thing. So all of them nest together, and they're all fractal, right? So think about this. You can take that same principle of fractals and zooming through things and show how you could zoom through this just by expanding them. Like if you expand the amount of energy that they have, the size that they have, you pump them up, and they twist, and as the lines continue changing, you can ratchet one shape into another. And that's a very, very important point. And here's where it gets even more trippy. All you have to do is use spheres. You take individual spheres that are all the same size, and then you start putting them together, and that's called close packing. So this whole science of close packed spheres, how many spheres can you fit together as tightly as possible? What you're seeing here is the Merkaba made of close packed spheres. All the same geometry I was showing you, it's just a function of spheres. There's another Merkaba made out of spheres. Here's the octahedron made out of spheres, and here's another example. And then what we have is the octahedron with the cube around it, again, all made out of spheres. You add more spheres, and then you get this. Now you got your icosahedron, dodecahedron, and you can invert it. So this actually shows that the universe is building, this is my interpretation, is the universe is building little spheres of energy. And those little spheres packed together, they're attracted to each other. and they form this geometry, and this is the basis of all reality. It fractalizes out. So this comes to us now, this idea that the universe could be built from this stuff is it's part of a great scientific breakthrough that, in my view, changes everything that we thought we knew. And you've heard me say this before, I'm sure, by now. If not, this is going to blow your doors off. But it had to be mentioned. And you're going to hear some new things about it that I discovered only at the last talk. So only if you saw the last talk will this be familiar to you. That was the one I did at Conscious Life Expo. If you haven't seen it, this is going to rock your world. It did for me. So this came out in 2013, and I had basically what you could call a geekgasm when I read this. I start running. I literally wanted to unbuckle my seatbelt as we're climbing in altitude in an airplane and run up and down the aisles, screaming with joy. It all makes sense. It all makes sense. Which probably would have made me learn really quickly where the federal air marshal who's packing a concealed weapon was. And I would be zip-tied, and I would have a very painful flight. And then I'd be all known as the conspiracy theorist who went crazy on the airplane. Why did I want to run up and down? Because of this. Because of what these guys discovered. Nima Arkani Hamed and Yaroslav Trunka. This blew me away. Here's what they look like. Two scientists from Caltech. And what they did was to go through and analyze all of the scientific information that's available to them about quantum physics and particles and how particles are formed and what kind of jitters and waves appear in the subatomic level. And scientists have spent so much time analyzing just how two little particles interact with each other. You shoot this particle out of this gun, you shoot this particle out of this gun. Do they come together? Do they fall apart? And how do they interact? And it creates a little squiggly pattern. And there are 90-page long equations for each squiggle. Those are called the Feynman diagrams. And I was on stage with the physicist Nassim Haramein at one point, and he confirmed that the Feynman diagrams are the bane of all physicists. It's just horrible. So if you got to do 90 pages of calculations for each one of these squiggles, and there's thousands of them, you could lose your freaking mind trying to make sense out of this stuff. But these guys discovered that you can take all of those different diagrams for each squiggle and solve all of them with a single pattern, a single geometric form. Solves all those squiggles beautifully, perfectly, and elegantly. How does this work? The shape itself they called the amplituhedron, and another name for it that's even more outrageous is the positive Grassmannian. That's just an esoteric physics term. Here's what it looks like. But that diagram didn't do very much for me. Now remember, in this case, the geometry is what's really important. The sine waves that you see along each line are meant to illustrate how the geometry, it doesn't just sit there, it's jiggling. But their theory is that the jiggles of the geometry are actually expanding out into the entire frickin' cosmos. Now again, that's kind of hard to visualize, except that I just showed you the fractals, the Mandelbrot set. And I showed you how you can zoom in on that sucker, and no matter how far you go, you keep seeing more and more and more. So this one little guy is jiggling, and it expands and expands and expands and becomes all the stars, all the galaxies, all the planets, and all the life in the entire frickin' universe, moment by moment. But the only thing that really exists is this little shape. That's really frickin' trippy. And so here's the actual diagram of the underlying geometry that is wiggling and making the whole universe. Now, Sir Roger Penrose in the 1970s got pretty close. This was his idea. He didn't quite nail it, but he got a lot of the math right, and then these guys just came in and basically completed his work. And it actually was a simpler geometric pattern than what Penrose thought it was. It's basically 4 tetrahedrons stuck together, just like these tetrahedrons on the wall. We got 4 on the wall. You could take these down, fit them together, and make that shape. That's all it is. Now, what did I see? Right away, I said, whoa, this is why I wanted to run up and down the aisles. That's just part of the Merkaba. And you fit the whole thing together and you get this. Really? We got to get some air conditioning in here. People are getting crazy. It's gone there. And I still got 2 hours to go. All right. We're having fun. It's all good. So I want to show you how they morph together now. Check this out. So here we start with the original shape that they found. Now we got this guy. So let's look at what happens. You can clearly see that these two shapes grow out of each other, and that the Merkaba is just a larger form. But again, because this shape is so symmetrical, they only needed to find 4 of the tetrahedrons to build the whole pattern that explained all of quantum mechanics. They didn't need to get the whole thing. And because the geometry is fractal, it all worked out. Now, oh, the Tibetan Buddhists, right? That's some ancient skeptic now talking. Oh, that's just some ancient culture. They didn't know anything. What did the Tibetans actually say the universe was made from? That. That trips me out, because what they're saying is that this shape is the original shape of the universe, and that it expands, and they actually equate that with a sound that they call Aum. They say that the expansion of the original shape makes a humming noise, which wouldn't it do that? Right? There's going to be a vibration. There's going to be something happens as this. Sound is just vibration, right? So as that little guy, that little geometry goes, it's vibrating and it's making a sound. And so what they would also teach in their ascension teachings is that if you make the same sound, then you actually, are you filming? Oh no, she's not filming. Okay. Yeah, we don't want filming here. It's just like, you know, I can't keep doing the same talk over and over again and not get caught if it ends up on the internet. No, I always do it different, but it's, you know, I try to keep things a little bit more organized. And anyway, you got in here late, so you didn't hear me say that. It's all good. So, this one is another Buddhist mandala, which trips me out. Why? Because it's got the geometry within geometry in it. And again, what they're saying is, there is this shape, that the actual shape for the vowel ah, they make that shape, and it's called a tigli. And so one of the illustrations you see in these ascension diagrams from the Tibetans is the tigli shape, this actual Sanskrit character for ah, with a rainbow around it. And what they teach is that the whole universe is the rainbow that emanated from this original shape. But in other diagrams, they show it as a geometry. So is this just some boring old thing that doesn't mean anything? Or is this the result of extraterrestrials who already knew all this stuff that we're just now learning? And they know that this is the secret to ascension, because if you visualize yourself as the Merkaba, if you start to do that meditation, then you are actually reorienting your mind with your primal identity. The Tibetans taught us that the primal identity must be re-accessed, and it can only be done with meditation. So they tell you that your mind is empty and your mind is aware. Empty awareness. And it's supposed to be something that's the whole universe. So they would teach you, as I said, if you saw my talk in the amphitheater, they would teach you to meditate on like a big, gorgeous mountain view. And imagine that you're projecting your awareness into that view so that your mind now engulfs the entire area that you're looking at. This is why these guys that ascended were in the Himalayas, because they would do this practice as they looked at mountains. It's why I live in the mountains. Same thing. I deliberately do that, even though it takes me frickin' 20 minutes to drive to any type of civilization. It's worth it. Pretty soon I'll be levitating into civilization. So, awareness that is empty. That's what you get when you get in touch with this geometry. They teach you to recognize in meditation that you are the awareness of the universe, that awareness is you. And then you acquire what in the law of one is called personality transparency. Now here's where it gets controversial. The Masonic symbol, the square and compass, oh, wait a minute. It's the same geometry. The seed of the universe. The G means God or geometry. The compass is what you use to draw circles, and the square is what you use to draw straight edges. That's the equipment that you would use to draw the geometry. So this does appear to have come to them from extraterrestrials who already knew what the heck this thing was. Now, unless you saw the talk that I gave on Monday night at Conscious Life Expo, this should be new to you. Was anybody here for the Monday night Conscious Life Expo? I know you were. Anybody else? How many? Okay, not too many. You were there. I remember that. Okay. This is awesome. You guys are going to be excited for this because you're all big fans of this stuff. You've watched everything, read everything. I saw this. It totally tripped me out. What I realized was that these guys who are academically studying this geometric pattern, they never really saw what it was. And it thundered in on my head after I'd done a talk on Saturday at Conscious Life Expo. So there's only like 5 of you in the room who saw that I made this connection. I realized that the geometry of the original thing is a photon, which is so important, right? Because what did I just say about photons? I said that DNA attracts them, that the photon carries the genetic code, and that the photons can actually make DNA molecules out of water. And the photons can rewrite sick tissue into healthy tissue. The photons are the life force that's sucked out of you if somebody is an energy vampire. So this photon, when we hear these ancient esoteric traditions, what do they always say? In the beginning there was the light. The light was the first thing that was created. So this now, we got to look at it as not just some ancient thing, but it's extraterrestrial download. Because their scientists already figured all this stuff out. Now we got to redo the work. So what is that geometry? It's a photon. How do we prove this? We go back to this guy, Dr. Max Planck, who actually studied quantum level and came up with the infamous Planck's constant. And I swear to God, this is the only equation you're going to hear in the talk, except for the ones that were flying at you at the beginning. That's it. So Max Planck's big discovery was that energy is quantized. Energy travels in individual packets. Now, we're going to see that those packets are ultimately the geometry I just showed you. And I'm going to prove that to you. The size of the packets, and the packets, of course, are photons. That's part of the science. So all energy is made of photons. The photons are individual. Up until then, they didn't know if it was a steady stream or if it was individual bursts. Now we know light is a series of individual bursts that are packets. But as you pump them up and you put more energy into them as they're released, they will get larger. And so there's a proportion, there's a set amount of how much they get larger depending on how much energy you pump in. And this suggests that there is a consistent structure underlying the expansion. And this creates a ratio or a constant. So this is measured, the way that Planck calculated the constant was by looking inside a cube of space and then making an arbitrary measurement of the cube's volume of 10. He just picked a number. There's nothing more to it than that. He just decided it was 10. So that's really important. The volume of the cube is 10. So now watch the magic. The science says that this is the equation. And again, it's a very, very simple equation. This is about as easy as it gets. E is energy, and V is the velocity, E is the energy, the amount of energy you pump in, V is the volume, See, I can't even get a freaking simple variable equation correct. I'm in trouble. V is the frequency. H is Planck's constant. So what it shows is that as the energy pumps up, the packets get larger in size, and they do it by a set proportion. So it's about as simple as you could ever get. That's a geometric relationship. So here's the actual measurement of Planck's constant, 6.626 times 10 to the minus 34. Now, that 6.626 is a dimensionless constant, which means that it stays the same regardless of the size of the packet, and it's all based on 10 being the full volume of the cube. So let's think about that. 6.6 out of 10. That's 2/3 exactly. This is going to become very significant. Now here's, I had to throw this one in. Two great human advances. In 1899, Planck's constant, the proportionality constant between the energy of a photon and the frequency of its wave. 2011, Plancking, the phenomenon of being photographed while lying Planck-like on an object, and subsequent distribution of the image via social media. Just so we can get it clear, you know? Two great human advancements. So this is where it's so trippy. Check this out. The tetrahedron fills exactly 1/3 of the volume of a cube. So if the cube's volume is 10, 1/3 is 3.333. But the Merkaba is 2 tetrahedrons. That's going to fill a total of 2/3 or 6.666. And then when you crank it through Coulomb's equation, it drops down a little bit. And that's just the permittivity of space. But basically, you got Planck's constant being 6.6. So it totally fits. And again, the energy of the vacuum, Coulomb's equation, drops it a little bit. But anyway, check this out. Photons are tetrahedral Merkabas. And I spent years talking to a scientist named Rod Johnson who taught me all this stuff. He'd independently figured this out, and then later figured out that Buckminster Fuller had also concluded that photons were Merkabas because of this. So I didn't make this up. 2 different credentialed scientists independently came up with this. And it's a very, very significant point, because what it shows us is that all these light patterns, the light that we see is the fractal. Now think about what I just said. There's one seed that the whole universe is made from. When I showed you the Mandelbrot set and we're zooming in on that sucker, as we zoom in, what do we keep seeing? Images of the original. If nothing else exists in the universe except for photons, they're all images of the original. The original photon has now been discovered by these scientists who did this totally outrageous math, and the original photon appears in Tibetan Buddhist mandalas from like 1,200 years ago or more. So this obviously is really, really trippy. So here you have the tetrahedron inside the cube, just so you can really, really get this. We know scientifically that's 1/3 the volume of the cube. And when you put the two of them together, the photon, actually what happens is they stretch out like this. So they go face to face. And then as it passes through the cube, it totally moves out through 2/3 of the volume. And this shape that we're looking at right now is the shape that photons look like when they've been studied in the lab. They don't quite get the corners, but this actual shape is what, it's pretty close to what the scientists get, because they make it look like this elongated form. It's just the corners in the middle, they don't quite get that yet. So what does this mean? This means that this brand new science, this really exciting thing that these guys figured out, is actually, they discovered the photon. They haven't gone that far. They haven't figured it out yet, that they found the first photon in the universe. But it's the only photon in the universe because everything comes from the light. Wow. See why I got so excited when I figured this out? That amplitude-hedron is not just any old thing. It's a photon. And that validates all these spiritual teachings that the universe is made of intelligent light. And then the light, the whole basis of the fractalizing of the light is geometry. So if you're not tripping already, you're about to go a lot deeper down the rabbit hole. So what's the first thing that this photon does is it fractalizes. It turns into a sphere. It fractalizes out into a big sphere. And that's the first star of the universe, the primordial sun. It makes itself into that. Then that first star starts to bud off smaller stars and those planets eventually become stars. And eventually it buds and buds and buds and fractalizes out into a super galaxy. That's the big galaxy that we now know is where all the other galaxies in the universe are located in. The universe is not just a big sphere in which there's equal matter distribution all the way through the sphere. It's a flat disk. And the blueprints of this are still visible in the universe. So I'm going to remind you of something here, because this really tripped me out. This was one of the discoveries I made a couple months ago. And, you know, I just got so excited. Let's go back to the Merkaba diagram for a minute, okay? Now let's remember that the original photon, the amplituhedron, the Merkaba, the original photon, is this little guy standing up straight, so the axis goes up and down like this. Now, so there's one example of it, and you can see that, again, the octahedron hides inside the photon, hides inside the tetrahedron, okay? But notice that there is a tilt that you have to do. I'm just showing you different versions of the same thing. This is the one I wanted. So there's your Merkaba, okay? Let's assume that the top and bottom of the universe, the original top and bottom of the universe, is going to be the top and bottom of the Merkaba, and that the whole universe has been formed from this one little guy. And it just burst. It just exploded and created this massive amount of volume of stars. And those stars are going to be held together by geometric fields because they're resonating in geometric patterns. And that's jumping a little bit ahead. But I want you to check this out first. Now imagine, if you can, that this guy is just bursting out. It's just expanding at an incredible rate of speed. And as it does so, it's shooting off dust because it's creating stuff. Now check out this octahedron here. And imagine that this octahedron is also expanding and creating dust and belching out dust at the same time that the octahedron, that the Merkaba, is forming the whole universe. So notice the tilt. Notice the tilt angle. I was so excited when I saw this. Why? Because the universe has an octahedron-shaped dust pattern at the far edges. The dust of that shape is still out there in this so-called supergalaxy. So there's the supergalaxy. Now you don't really see anything yet. But this is where all the galaxies are in the middle. It's a big flat disk. We only see it from the side because we don't have the ability to go up there where we can look down on it. But we know that it's a big galaxy. But then you got all this extra dust that kind of blew off around it on the top and the bottom. This is the entire universe. This is a map of the visible. I'm sorry if I didn't make that clear. Got 179 IQ points blowing around in my head like a fucking popcorn popper. Okay? Try to keep up with me if you can. Why did I have to drop the F-bomb? Can't I just let go of that? My goodness. It's fun, though. I'm from New York. That's what we do. Okay. So, yeah, this is the map of the universe. This is everything there is based on telescopic observation. Now, if these guys have discovered that the only thing that really exists in the center of the universe is the Merkaba, and the Merkaba went goosh and burst out, and a lot of dust was created as it expanded, oh my God. What we see here is this pattern on the same tilt angle as where the octahedron is inside the Merkaba. And when you wrap this thing around, because remember, this is like a Mercator projection of the Earth's globe, you got to make it into a globe, and what do you get? An octahedron. Holy crap. So this is a visible piece of evidence that when this little guy exploded and created the entire frickin' universe in that moment of creation, that the octahedron inside shot off all this dust. Notice the tilt angle, and I'm going to bring you right back here. It's the same thing. All that dust right now, whatever it is, 18 trillion years later, it's still in the same pattern. So let's take a look now. Think about fractals. What was he saying? What was that dude saying? He was talking about fractals. He was talking about geometry. He said that the geometry fractals too, because he was saying that the different types of geometry are nested inside of each other, and one goes into the other, and I showed you the cube with the dodecahedron and all this stuff, right? So the geometry is always going to be there. The geometry are like the lines of force that hold everything together. They're exerting pressure. Geometry exerts pressure that we would interpret as gravity. There's gravitational pressure that's holding things in a certain position. So what happens to the galaxies inside the supergalaxy as they form? They form into a geometric pattern that scientists call the egg carton universe. Wait till you see this stuff. This is a kind of difficult diagram to really make out very much from. But you notice that there is a series of approximately 4 or 5 squares in it. And the geometry, if you look carefully, you can see that these blobs kind of are hugging the geometry. In fact, they're hugging it very well. That's no good, though. The one that really, really rocked me, and I saw this back in like 99 or 2000, was this. This is our local neighborhood, folks. What's that in the middle? You see where it says sun up at the top? And then there's an arrow that goes into the middle between the two octahedrons. That's a gigantic blob of millions and trillion, well, billion, I don't know how many. I don't freaking know, but it's a lot. Millions of galaxies. It's called a galactic supercluster. So we're talking about absolutely vast-sized areas. And what you're seeing here is a series of squiggly lines or blobs that correspond to where the galaxies congregate. These are galaxies. I'm talking about gigantic amounts of millions of galaxies for each blob. So if you look at this, this is a blob that is filled with millions and millions and millions, if not more, of galaxies. And they line up. They look at the corners, right? Look at the top, the bottom, each of the corners of each octahedron. There's a blob with all these galaxies hanging out there. And notice that along the lines, especially in the middle, that there's galaxies that form along the lines. So this is showing you that the universe has fractalized out of that original photon. I don't know anybody else that's ever put this together besides me, which is pretty freaking cool. Thank you. I had a stodgy old grandfather who was a PhD engineer. And long before I'd even made it this far, I was telling him some of my physics breakthroughs, and he said, "Well, David, if what you find out is actually true, then it's worthy of a Nobel Prize." And that was like the best compliment he ever paid me in my life, because he was not into any of the stuff that I'm doing at all. But, you know, you're not going to get a Nobel Prize for this stuff, because it integrates too many things, and they don't want this to break out into the mainstream, right? They want to keep this occult. They don't want you to know this stuff. So then the other thing that's weird is that it actually stacks up 3 high throughout the universe. For some weird reason, the super galaxy is made of stacks of octahedrons that go 3 high, and then the one that we're in is at the bottom. We're in the middle. So here's a map of what the 3 high octahedrons look like when you see them in larger groups, and because there's tons of these that make up the supergalaxy, that's why they call it the egg carton universe. Okay? Because in the areas between where the geometry is, those are called voids. There are no galaxies because it's all vibrating, and the vibration is geometric. So the galaxies can only form where the vibration allows them to go. Now, the circle makers, we had Patty Greer on the panel last night talking about crop circles, right? And that was pretty cool. Yeah, a lot of you guys were there. And I wanted her on the panel to help set this up today because we were asking, is there a message in the crop circles? Okay. Some of the sacred geometry, and a lot of the sacred geometry that I'm talking about shows up in the crop circles. So this, for example, is the fractalizing octahedron that made the universe. That's what I believe it is. It's showing how it's fractalizing out. And then I remember at one point, I'm trying to think about the idea of all these octahedrons forming a big giant galaxy, and what would that actually look like? And I'm thinking, I want to draw this. I want to commission an artist to draw the super galaxy made out of octahedrons. And I'm trying to visualize this in my head, and I'm thinking about it, and it didn't even take 30 seconds. And I went, oh my God, there's a crop circle that already drew it. Right there. How the hell did that thing form in a bunch of wheat? Oh yeah, it's an army of hedgehogs running round and round. Two drunk chaps named Doug and Dave came over with a few pints in the bellies and got a funny cap, a string, and a board. Starting to turn into Monty Python now, right? This is an X-parrot. That's an inside joke if you know Monty Python. I can still fight you, honestly. Huh? Oh, my God. Now I want to downshift. I want to downshift to galaxies and again blow your mind. And this is another thing that I've been holding on to that I've only publicly released starting at the last expo. I didn't know when I was going to release this, but the time became right. So, what we usually see for a galaxy diagram is this idealized version of the Milky Way. This is not real. This is a fabrication based on existing kind of how it looks and very elaborate art, but notice that it's very spiraling. It's very circular. And then, of course, it says there, all the stars you can see in the sky fit into that tiny little red circle at the bottom. So all the rest is outside of our visible range. That's how big this thing is. Well, is there any proof? Is there any really tangible, undeniable, obvious, smack you in the face with a 2x4 plank kind of proof, bang, that shows that there's something going on with certain galaxies, at least, if not all of them, and I believe it's all of them, in which geometry is controlling them, that they're actually geometric, so that resonance of that original photon is actually affecting them. What you're about to see is a nebula. Now, a nebula is sort of like a galaxy. It's an emitter or a cloud of gas, and the gas is very colorful. Well, wait a minute. What about this nebula right here? Does this look normal to you? It's going to turn. Bang. That is HD 44179. And you can see there is an emitter in the middle. And the gases, the dust that's coming out, are precisely organized into a geometric pattern. And remember, this is not flat. It's not flat. So what are we actually looking at? We're looking at octahedrons. This is actually, it's like a big giant cube. But there's two octahedrons in there, and you're seeing the sides of them. So those octahedral energy fields actually are exerting pressure, gravitational pressure. There is a cubical or octahedron gravity field that is containing that dust in a structure, just like it contains, the gravity contains those galaxies in the egg carton structure, the super galaxies. There's another one. Now, if you only found one of these, it's crazy enough, but they found two of them so far. That's just the ones I've been able to see. This, again, would be a cube in space. It is not flat. Now I want to go through and show you some galaxies, and when you start looking at the way they actually look, you realize, wait a freaking minute. We have been lied to. There's a very intrinsic aspect of science that is being overlooked. So let's check out M61. You don't have to look at that very long, or just if you want to cheat, go and look at the top left in the headline. galactic hexagon. You take a look at that and tell me that you don't see that there's a hexagon hanging out in the middle, that there is some kind of geometry that is holding those galactic spiral arms in place in a shape pattern, a geometric pattern. Nobody, hardly anybody has ever talked about this, and even this galactic hexagon article only used M61. They didn't realize that it was actually working on many, many other galaxies. Another one that is amazing is NGC 1232. Look at that. You see pentagons. So galaxies are not curving. And you can see geometry within geometry. If you look carefully, you can see it's not just one level. It goes in, it ratchets in. Now let's turn this, first of all, we're going to flip it over to the other side, like that. Then we're going to tilt it 90 degrees clockwise, and we get this. Now this is an X-ray diagram, and this is very, very important. Most of the time, when the astronomers really want to know what a galaxy looks like, they have to use this type of shape, this type of illustration. What are we seeing? If you go back to the previous illustration for a moment, let me do that. A lot of what you're seeing here is not stars. You're seeing reflected light that's coming off of dust. So you don't actually get to see visually where all the stars are. The light can glow brightly enough that the actual locations, the positions of the stars, can get screwed up. The glow is kind of overshadowing that stuff. So you need to see an X-ray diagram in order to find the geometry. Well, check this out. All you got to do is start drawing some lines in here, and you can very easily see the pentagonal geometry. So let me back it up again, just so now you know what I'm showing you. You can exactly see where that sucker was as it comes back in. And there's others as well that are easily seeable. So this is kind of unfortunate, but what it means is that this type of X-ray diagram, this boring black and white diagram, is what we need to look at in order to actually find the geometry of the galaxies. If you don't see it this way, the photograph alone is not going to show it to you. So the images that I'm pulling from now are from this, which is called the Revised Shapley-Ames Catalog. And it just goes through all the different types of galaxies that are out there. Now this is a very nice, organized collection of all the different types of galaxies that are out there. And I went through all of them one by one. I looked at every single picture on this website. And I found that approximately 85 to 90% of them had geometric features. And the others were just kind of too indistinct to really make it out, but that doesn't mean it's not there. If 85 to 90% of them show geometry, and I'm only going to show you some of the best, then we have a new law of nature that nobody is telling us about. So here's NGC 3646. The visible light photo shows a very clear hexagonal pattern there. But when you look at it in the X-ray, it's even more obvious. You can see a sharp, straight line. You can see the hexagon. And that one, where they tighten it up even more into the blue range of the X-rays, they break it down into spectrums as well. You can see it even more. And there's the dust configuration. The dust actually shows it in this case very nicely as well. And there's many, 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 many galaxies that I can do this with, but because we only have 3 hours, I'm not going to do a whole lot of them. If you haven't already figured this out, if you've seen my stuff before, all of this science that I'm showing you can be explained by what they call cymatics. Cymatics is the study by Dr. Hans Jenny, that's how you pronounce that name, even though it looks like Jenny, the J is silent, it's like a Y. So Dr. Hans Jenny studied a drop of water, and he put particles in the water, and it's normally going to just look like milk. There's nothing distinct in the water. Now, when he vibrated the water at certain pure sound frequencies, oh my God. Now, most of you guys have already seen this, so I'm not getting the orgasmic gasping. that I normally would expect to have. Okay, don't actually do it. That was only a joke. Check it out. You have a fluid, you have particles in the fluid, and you get the Merkaba. Oh, now everybody's going to try to flood the bathroom at the same time. Oh, I know this part. Fuck David. I got to piss, dude. Hey, look, it's not my fault. They made me have a 3-hour talk, and I can't have the time to have a break in the middle, so there you go. We're just going to blaze on through this thing. So, let's keep going. As you change the vibration, the geometry changes as well. You play a different sound into the water. That's all this is a drop of water with sand in it. You change the sound, you get different types of geometry that form. Just exactly like how I showed you that the different Platonic solids, those different geometries that the universe is built from, change their form as the frequency changes. There's the proof. Well, guess what? These little guys, this fluid vibration, is exactly what the galaxies are doing on the supergalactic level. The whole frickin' universe is structured this way, which shows that ultimately this one Merkaba form, the original photon, the universe itself is like a fluid. It's like a fluid. There's some kind of fluid-like energy out there. And as the Merkaba vibrates and it fractalizes, it's actually fractalizing as a vibration, a fluid-like vibration. And then when you change the frequency, you get different geometry. In fact, here we have a list of 9 different shapes, all from the same drop of water, all with the same sand inside, and they form stable patterns that do not change the way they look unless you change the frequency. We don't actually, I mean, you could probably go back to the original video and listen to the frequency that created the Merkaba. I don't know. But it would also be a function of the size and the volume of the drop of water and how spherical it really is. There was another guy, and that was Dr. Buckminster Fuller, who took a spherical balloon and dipped it in dye and then vibrated the balloon at different sound frequencies, and he could get any of the Platonic solids to form over the balloon, because that's where the dye would be able to collect, is along the geometry where it's vibrating. And, you know, because it's like the vibrations, this is like if you think about a guitar string. You ever pluck a guitar string, you look at it, and there will be these little areas called nodes where the string doesn't move up and down, it just stays in one place. Each of these corners are vibrational nodes. Those are the areas where the vibration is not moving as much. And so what happens is there's all these little sand particles inside these shapes, and they're on the go. They're moving all through the whole structure. They don't just sit there. But the form stays consistent. So in terms of the universe, we have these universal geometric fields which are holding the galaxies in position, thus forming the egg carton. We have these fields holding the galactic arms in position, thus causing those weird geometric angles on the arms that I just showed you. Then when you take larger amounts of water, like we would have in the universe, the equivalent fluid medium of the universe, you take larger amounts, you put sand in that, and then you increase the frequency, you get multicellular structure. The same image keeps reiterating and reiterating, and then when you crank the frequency up, it changes to a different pattern, and notice once again you have that octahedron type of pattern, just like we saw with the galaxies. So this is essentially now advanced egghead physics that proves that the universe is a vibration of light that also has a sound quality. It's really amazing, because think about what this could mean if all the atoms on Earth are at one frequency now. What happens if the frequency increases? There could be some other level of reality that's around us right now that we don't have access to because we're not at the same vibration. And that is what we know, that there are cloaking systems run by the government and the various black ops programs that can, what they call mask. Most people call it cloaking. They actually call it masking, according to Pete Peterson. And they already have it for airplanes. They can mask out an airplane. You'll still hear it going through the air, but you won't see it. The photons just bend around it. Now, this goes directly down to the quantum level, and you've probably all seen me talk about this before. Some of you, this might be new, probably not very many. Does anybody not know who Dr. Robert Moon is? Raise your hand if you don't know. Oh, now wait a minute. Okay. That means you haven't all watched every episode of the show. That's good. This is in some of the older episodes. I'm glad that you don't know this already. That makes me feel good. Okay. So now I get to do my Dr. Robert Moon jokes. So anyway, this is one of the guys who worked on the original nuclear program. He worked on the original Manhattan Project that developed the nuclear bomb. So he certainly has credibility as a scientist. And he looks pretty freaking paranoid in this photo. And I would be too if I'd build a nuclear bomb. There might be some people who would decide the world would be better off without me. And apparently, if you want to be a genius scientist, A, you need to have a blackboard behind you with equations on it, and B, you need to grow your hair out like wavy gravy. And I'm pretty sure that's a pocket protector in his front pocket there. He's definitely got the college professor look for sure. Now, Dr. Robert Moon had come across to us as the scientist who developed the nuclear bomb, but then he had this tremendous scientific insight in 1987. And we are now getting some very, very much needed ventilation in the room. So give them a big round of applause, everybody. We've been freaking dying in here. This is awesome. The actual exterior temperature is better than the air conditioning. Go figure. On a day that was only like 115 degrees. All right. So, genius scientist who figured out how to make a nuclear bomb. In order to do that, you got to play around with subatomic particles. That means you got to understand how subatomic particles work. That means that he understands all of these different quantum laws about how atoms and molecules work and how they fit together and what do they do and what are the weird, strange laws. And he eventually discovered that there were all these strange things about atoms and molecules. There is also like a fire exit door back here. I don't know if you guys want to jack that one open as well. But maybe I'll get more dogs coming in. I'm not really sure at this point. They'll be very happy to be here. We'll see if they have anything intelligent to say. The people are taking back the power, folks. This is where it's happening, right here. So what he found out in 1987 was that there's all these weird little things about atoms that most of us don't even know. There's laws about how the atomic nucleus fits together. So that atomic nucleus is the key. The nucleus has protons and neutrons in the normal model. But the neutrons are only put in there because they think that they should be there. Because they think that the neutrons are needed to make the math work. Oh, we're kind of getting a little bit of glare. You guys, it's too bright? Okay, why don't we close that one? We got to at least save one side. Okay, that side isn't quite as bad. All right. There's warm air anyway, he said. Okay. It's anarchy. It's chaos. All right. We're just trying to figure this thing out. Okay, so anyway, 1987, he's looking at the atoms and molecules that make up the universe. He's studying their properties. He's looking for magic numbers. He's looking at the protons inside the nucleus. And he comes up with the idea that the nucleus of the atom is not just a big ball of protons, that the protons are in shells. And that as atoms increase in their size and atomic weight, that there are shells within shells that grow. So look at this. This is his geometric solution of the atomic nucleus. Wow, this is fun, huh? I'm just loving this whole thing. Somebody just wrapped their belt around it or something. If we have some gaffer tape, we could tape it together. Does anybody, any AV guys have some tape? All right, cool. It's working. So now what am I showing you here? This is really going to trip you out. And again, most of you don't know about this yet, which is really cool. That excites me. So these are the layers of how protons appear inside the nucleus. These are protons. Now what the heck? Wait a minute. I was taught in school that a proton is a particle. No. In Dr. Robert Moon's model, the protons are just waves, and the waves are geometric. So each proton is a corner of a geometric object. So what's oxygen? Oxygen has 8 protons. So in Dr. Robert Moon's model, the oxygen is a cube sitting in the middle. The cube has 8 corners. Those are the 8 protons. So you are utterly dependent on oxygen to breathe, right? So as you inhale oxygen, you're inhaling all these little cubes. And the cube is a fractal of the image of the original photon of the universe. So your breath, the power of your breath, the shamanic spiritual energy that all these meditation practices, remember they want you to really breathe deeply, and then that's how you ascend. You're taking in sacred geometry. You're inhaling it into your lungs, and there's energy in there that's actually awakening your ascension. It's preparing you for the ascension. It's unbelievable that oxygen is the one thing that if we don't have it for even really like a blood choke to the brain, it's like 60 seconds and you're dead. Then we have the next pattern after that is the octahedron, where you're adding now another 6 protons, and that brings you silicon. Anyway, I'm going to run you through the whole thing. It'll be easier to see if we do it one at a time. So the first element is the cube with the 8 corners. And again, this is only a vibration, and it's all a vibration of the original photon making these atoms. 8 protons, oxygen. What's the number there, the percentage? That's the total number, the total percent of Earth's mass, the total weight of the Earth that is oxygen. So 62.55% of all the matter on Earth is oxygen. That's because matter wants to do this. Matter wants to go into the cube pattern because it's the home vibration. It's what feels good. So these elements are the most useful for life because it's a biological universe. That's why we need to breathe oxygen. Then we have the octahedron, the next layer. The octahedron shows up as silicon because silicon has 14 protons. And that's 21.2% of all the mass of the universe. Yeah, so now we've had another side effect, which is that it's actually gotten a lot hotter. And apparently the cooling effect that we found was just the motion of air-conditioned air as it was leaving the building. Good God. Fuck. Whatever. They're doing it next year in May. Let's just all give a big round of applause for that brilliant insight. Who would have thunk it? Wow, if May, it's not going to be as hot. Okay. There's other reasons why it was done in June this time, so it's all good. Anyway, let's go down the list. And we get to silicon next, 21.2% of all the mass of the Earth. We're right there. We're up to 73.7. That's a lot. And those are the 2 home vibrations that matter wants to make. And a lot of things are made out of silicon. Silicon is a very, very important element for the building of skin and cells and proteins and all that stuff. Then the next one we have is the icosahedron, which adds up to 26 corners altogether, and that's iron. And iron is weird because it is magnetic. The magnetic property of iron is why this is so interesting. So then, that's the icosahedron we see around the outside, 1.2% of the mass. It's magnetic. Nobody's been able to explain why refrigerator magnets don't fall off the refrigerator. What the heck is a permanent magnet? Why does it just keep generating energy? All you have to do is move a wire over the magnet and it induces electrical current in the wire. That's called Lenz's law. Pretty amazing. So this could explain where magnetic energy is coming from. It's the resonance coming off of the iron molecule. The iron atom, the nucleus, is resonating, creating a magnetic field. Then we go down. We got the cube, we got the octahedron, we got the icosahedron, which is iron. Then we go down, we got the dodeck. That's the last one, and that's palladium. Now, why is palladium so interesting? Here's your dodeck again in the middle. Palladium is the magic material that they drop into heavy hydrogen, this hydrogen water, and the palladium generates heat. For some reason, it starts vibrating, and it creates all this heat that it shouldn't create. And that forms what they call cold fusion. So the whole secret to cold fusion is the palladium. Nobody knows why it works. But with Dr. Robert Moon's discoveries from 1987, before they discovered cold fusion, we now have the scientific rationale for why it works, which is that guy, that dodeck, is resonating. The hydrogen is banging off of it, it's creating all this energy. So this explains all these really cool things. Now, is there any real practical proof that Dr. Robert Moon was right? Yes. I got all excited because IBM went down with this very advanced technology, and they were able to scan out a single molecule. They were able to see what it looks like at the molecular level. And guess what it looks like? Unfreaking believable. You can actually see the Merkaba. You can actually see the energy flow. You can see the hexagonal geometric containment pattern. It fits together so beautifully. So what we're dealing with here is a vibration that's actually making matter fit together a certain way. Now, we also have microclusters. This is another one of these weird things that we didn't understand how it worked until this quantum science comes along. This is 459 gold atoms on the left and 561 gold atoms on the right. What they were doing in these microcluster studies is they shoot atoms out of a gun, one at a time. The atoms then bundle together in certain patterns. But they always make certain magical shapes, which are geometric. They preferentially do this. They prefer to form geometry. Now, science has no explanation for this. But this is a map now of the actual different patterns that the geometry takes when you have a cluster of about 460 gold atoms hanging out. So it doesn't stay the same shape. It's constantly kind of moving because, remember, it's in a sea of energy. And there's waves in the ocean. There's waves in the sea. So as those waves move through, you notice that the shape is changing, but that the underlying geometry is always there. And that's actual real scanning electron microscope photographs. So this is all fine and good for dead matter. As in our conventional scientific view, we say, oh, the matter is dead. It's not really alive, right? So water would be following this. But what about living material? What about DNA? Well, DNA also has geometry and how those molecules fit together remarkably well. First of all, you get these hexagon-shaped chains and you get these pentagon-shaped chains. Nobody really understands why that's happening. Sacred geometry, the vibration of the original photon, the light that created the universe, the same mathematical patterns are in your DNA. She's writing everything down as I go. She's all excited about it. The rest of us are like, wow, I don't know about the heat in here. We're just trying to figure this thing out. Okay, so this guy, Dr. Mark White, looked at the DNA and figured out how the structure actually fits together. And I saw this diagram, I didn't really get it. I saw this diagram, I didn't really get it. But what you're supposed to be seeing is the dodecahedron, which is there on the left. And his discovery was that the double helix actually wraps around the geometry, meaning that the geometry ultimately is attracting those molecules that make DNA. The geometry is all there is. Well, that didn't do me any good until I saw this. This is a diagram that shows you a stack of dodecahedrons like a totem pole, and then you take the actual double helix of the DNA. It's like you got those old-fashioned pipe cleaners that you used to make little toys out of, right? Well, I'm from the 70s. I mean, it was cool back then. Trust me, if you're like freaking texting on your phone, millennial, you don't know what the hell I'm talking about. Anyway, you wrap the pipe cleaners around your little totem pole of dodecs, and the exact phase angle of the double helix is where the geometry tells those molecules to go. So the only thing that's really here is this vibration, this stack of dodecahedrons vibration, which are part of a larger structure. So the larger structure is also geometric, but these are the fractals. These are the tinier fractals. And remember, if you go inside here and you look at the deeper layers of vibration, all the other shapes will fit in there. The shapes of the other atoms and molecules. Remember, they're all interconnected, right? So this is like a geometric gravitational vortex. It's pulling, it's pulling gravitational energies pulling in. Well, what did I just say at the beginning of the talk happens to light when it's around DNA? It gets gravitationally sucked in. Is this starting to make sense to you now? Are you starting to get this thing? It's the same gravity. Honestly. That gives me a water break. I'm just going to take a water break here. It's the same gravitational force, a geometric gravitational force that pushes those atoms together when they're shot out one at a time and making those microclusters that I just showed you. It's the same gravitational force that's actually cohering matter into these protons in the nucleus that are geometric, like the oxygen, which is the cube, the silicon, et cetera, et cetera. It's the same stuff, the same forces that are holding galaxies together into supergalaxies and are taking galactic arms and making them geometric. Same force, this gravitational attraction in a geometric pattern, pulls all the atoms together and arranges them into DNA. So this is how DNA is formed out of non-living material. This is why the universe will make life wherever water is found. So then we advance forward to a very, very significant discovery, which is that watery planets are all over the frickin' universe. And this is a major, major part of my new book. The universe is teeming with Earth-like planets. We discovered this in 2013. This is Drake, and the Drake equation is what all the people hired by the television shows that are supposed to debunk UFOs. He made this calculation, which you see on this chalkboard behind him, in which he said, well, there's only 2.25 civilizations in the galaxy. Well, what the heck is a 0.25 civilization? But everybody thought, oh, man, he did it. He scientifically proved there's no life in the universe. Well, NASA's changed its tune, and I first found out about it in this article, The Fermi Paradox, quoting from this scientific paper, which actually tells us now the full implications of it are that there could be as many as 40 billion Earth-like planets just in our galaxy. 40 billion. If we took every person on Earth and gave them a ship that could go to anywhere in the galaxy and said, go look for planets that we could live on, dude. And if you have 7 billion people on Earth, and they're all adults now, you'd need, like, each person would have to go to 6 different Earth-like planets to even see them all. It's just, What do you do with that kind of stuff? So when we see this awesome percentage of Earth-like planets here, I just was pointing your attention now to the bottom. It says they surveyed 42,000 sun-like stars for the dimmings that occur when a planet crosses in front. We found 603 planets, 10 of which are Earth-size and orbit in the habitable zone. That means that there's a total of 22% of sun-like stars orbiting that have Earth-sized planets around them. The nearest planet may be only 12 light years away. So now think about all the laws that I've been telling you, and think about how, whoops, I wanted to go back to that for a minute. Think about all the science that I've showed you and how these geometric laws are not intrinsic to the Earth. They're intrinsic to the universe. There's a universal geometry that made everything, the original photon. If those guys are right, and I absolutely believe they are, then that's all there is. That means that you are the photon. This validates the ancient esoteric teachings that tell us that the universe is an alive, conscious being of light. That light was the original creation. In the beginning there was light, right? Or in the beginning there was the sound, the aum, and everything was made from that vibration. What we find out from all these different teachings that now appear to be given to us by extraterrestrials with advanced technology is that the light is what we are. And you have to evolve back into that. So ascension is where you meditate on that awareness. You meditate on that primordial awareness that you ultimately are, and that meditation transitions you back into your native form. So there's some other really cool stuff that I wanted to show you that now takes all this science and applies it directly to ascension and evolution. So we can prove that mass evolution is already happening, that we are already changing, we are already having these genetic rewrites that are implied by the science I said before. Consciousness is one of the scientists who I was really into, and you've heard me talk about him if you've read my books. But I got some pictures from the Russians. I've been asking for this for years, and they finally gave them to me, some real pictures of his research. This is all we had going on at first. This diagram was kind of hard to understand, but the idea was that he built some kind of a large room that was in the shape of a dodecahedron, right? Well, that's interesting. Dodecahedron, there it is. And then each corner, each face of the dodecahedron has a funnel coming out of it, which is those triangles that are measured by number 2. The funnels then have copper pipes that route over into another room, which is number 5. And then in this astonishingly precise scientific diagram, number 4 is a duck. Well, not so precise. Now what he's doing is number 3 is a microwave generator. It's not enough to kill the duck, but it's enough to jazz up his DNA. The duck's DNA is getting jazzed up. It's creating these photons that are released by the microwaves. The photons are then getting, some of them are getting routed through the pipes into room number 5, in which you now have a pregnant chicken with eggs in her womb. Now, thank God I finally was able to get us this. You're only the second audience ever to have seen this. This is the actual illustration, an actual photograph of the scientist Consciousness with this gigantic geodesic shape. It's not quite a dodecahedron as I'm now seeing because there's hexagons on those side faces, but it's close. And then inside there, he puts the duck in the microwave generator, and he zaps the duck, redirects the beam over into this little container over here, and he has these eggs, and he's taken the chicken out of there for a while, but the chicken is now normally going to be sitting on the eggs so they don't die, or perhaps he's just incubating them, but I think the chicken, I don't know if the chicken's in there or not, actually. It looks like the chicken is not, so maybe he just keeps them warm. So the eggs get a genetic rewrite from this DNA zapping. So what happens is their features change. So here's what a duck looks like. A duck has an elongated beak and webbing between its toes. Here's what chickens look like. The chicken has a shorter beak and is naked toes. Now, this just so happens to be an image I pulled up on Google of ducks and chickens. This is just a chicken that adopted ducks, okay? That's not what came out of the eggs. What we got was this, so-called duck hens. Now, for some reason, this guy chopped off legs from other duck hens, and stuck it above the other ones. I couldn't figure out for the longest time, why the hell are there two severed legs just hanging out above the other chicken? But then, so what he was trying to show was that chickens are not supposed to have webbing between their feet, but these duck hens actually do. And you can see it right there. So here's the findings that were discovered. He took a total of 500 different eggs. He could only do a little pile of them at each time. 500 different eggs were zapped. Of those 500 eggs, 480 of them actually hatched. That's pretty good. 80% of what came out had a flat duck-shaped head, not like a chicken. 90% had a shift in where the eye was located on the face, more to where a duck would be, and 25% had webbing appear between the toes. So notice on the duck's head that the eye is high and far back on the skull, and that there's an elongated beak and webbing. And the chicken's eye is kind of in the middle of the skull, and it has a short beak and no webbing. So this is a total transformation into these little guys. And then now, more recently, I found this picture of which he pickled one of the ducks. Now, here's the really cool thing. I got a message, and I don't know what to do with this yet. I'm just going to be honest with you. I got a message from a Russian colleague. I'm not going to say his name, just for security. But he writes me a lot of stuff, and I'm in the process of buying some technology from these guys. In fact, I already paid for it. Now I got to pay for shipping, and I haven't paid for the shipping yet, so I'm going to be doing that. Hopefully, I got to just write the guy back. I've just been really, really busy. Anyway, he wrote me an email yesterday and said that Conchazen is prepared to cook us up some more duck hens in his little box, and we can then DNA test their DNA. And would we sponsor that research in some way or get that research done? And I'm just saying it out to you now, so if anybody has an idea of how we could get DNA testing done on this duck DNA. Well, she doesn't like animal experimentation. The point is, this stuff has given us an underlying scientific principle. I don't think the research needs to be done anymore. I don't want to do more animal testing either. We already know. I mean, look, you can see right here what was done. On a much more benevolent level, doesn't mess with animals, he took corn and wheat and mixed it together. And what do you think that's going to look like? Nobody's ever seen this. You're only the second group to ever see this. You see the kind of the shape of the ear of corn, but then it's got the little tassels of wheat coming off of it. It's a morph between the two forms. And here he is. You can see now that they have the kind of stalks that corn would have, but then they also have wheat-like seed heads on top of them. So his other discovery was that he could make rooms in the shape of eggs out of metal, and that people staying inside them, their health would dramatically increase. And this mirrors many other studies, torsion field type studies. So there he is inside the egg-shaped room, and those plants all grow much better. And, you know, considering what this guy is doing with animals and stuff, maybe he might have messed around with that dog a little bit. No, I'm just joking. But, buddy, stay away from the turkey, all right? We don't want... No more. Just let him go. And there he is with his little pickled duck hen in the jar. So if you've ever wondered what the heck is going on with a duck-billed platypus, here's my theory. A few ducks were hanging out, and there were some moles nearby. Maybe some alcohol was involved. Who the heck knows? Or maybe they just got struck by lightning. But somehow their DNA fused together. This thing doesn't make any sense. It's not a bird, but it's got a bird beak. It's a frickin' freak. This thing doesn't make any sense at all. And it's got these weird poisonous spines on its feet. It's just very bizarre. That's all proof of this. Now, Dr. Garyaev, the same scientist who I was talking to you about before, showed that you could actually transform one species completely into another with no genetic freaks whatsoever. And this is the laser that I actually have already bought. I paid $1,500 for one of these lasers that you see right here. I haven't got it mailed to me yet. But I'm going to be able to do any of these type of tests if I wanted to, and there's other things you can do with it. Like, for example, they took the DNA from the great-granddaughter of a grandmother who's lost all of her teeth. They energized that DNA with one of these lasers, and it's got a certain kind of special vibrational signature that goes on it. And when you energize that DNA with the laser, for some reason, it stimulates the people backwards in the family tree. So if you have children, you can energize their DNA, and Grandma actually regrew 4 molars in the back of her mouth. Isn't that crazy? Now, they didn't get the whole mouth, and unfortunately, Garyaev, who you see right here, was fired from his job at a mainstream Russian hospital after he did that research. Because they said, that's impossible, you're crazy. So I actually was given an offer to buy one of these at half price. They're normally $3,000. I bought it for $1,500. And, you know, I don't have any children, but there's certainly ways that we could try to find people who do. And if they're missing some teeth, you know, we'll just see what happens. We'll have some fun with this thing. I don't know what else to do with it yet. I'm going to figure it out. But apparently it does lots of different healing stuff. If you have some good genetic DNA and you energize it with the laser, you can reactivate that DNA vibrationally. It's like you're rewinding the vibrational clock. And it has this very interesting healing effect. Another one of the things that he did is to take eggs that were naturally laid by a frog and then zap that laser that I just purchased through eggs laid by a salamander. The beaming into the frog eggs created a complete metamorphosis. The frog eggs that came out of a frog's body grew into salamanders and showed no evidence whatsoever of having come out of frogs. Now, yes, it's a creepy thing to be zapping lasers and doing this stuff, but the important point that I hope you don't miss is that this is exactly what is happening to us. This is part of the genetic aspect of ascension. This is the ascension process. So one of the studies that I found that shows us this was published in Mail Online, Daily Mail. This is May 31st, 2012. Nobody understands why this is happening, but in the last 150 years, the average skull of an American, studied from the mid-1800s up until 1980s, the average skull has had an increase in brain size and volume by a whole tennis ball. That's a total of 1,500 skulls that were surveyed. The faces are becoming longer and narrower. It's quite incredible. Quite incredible. This was another study that jerked my chain because it was published in June 2012. Source field had already come out by this point, and I argued that DNA was a universal, just like I've argued to you here. They didn't ever mention my book. They just talked about this without ever giving credit to the source of where it came from. That's very common. These things happen all the time. But the point is, they're putting out the idea that DNA is some sort of universal wave, which I've just now proven to you in this talk. So now we have this anthropologist from University of Wisconsin, Dr. John Hawkes, who's DNA testing mummies and looking at their evolutionary rate, which he calls positive selection. And in these studies, he found that human evolution has sped up 100 times faster in the last 5,000 years. So whatever we are doing in our part of the galaxy, it appears that we're moving into some new energy that's actually jacking up our DNA and changing it into something else, just like these genetic tests prove that can be done. The last 40,000 years have been a time of supercharged evolutionary change. And his ultimate discovery was that if you DNA test Neanderthal DNA and compare it to somebody from 5,000 years ago, The DNA of the Neanderthal is closer to that DNA from 3000 BC than it is to us. To put it in a simple language, our DNA has evolved by 7%. It's changed by 7% in the last 5,000 years. That's a gigantic amount of change. Totally unprecedented. So here is one study, one newspaper publication that shows this evolution taking place from the Daily Galaxy. Here's another one from the BBC. Human evolution is speeding up. And we have the Flynn effect that's showing that our IQ is going up. So there's an average increase of 3 IQ points per decade for over 100 years. Over 20 different countries, it's all doing the same thing. This is unbelievable. The increase is most striking for the tests that measure our ability to recognize abstract, non-verbal patterns. That means it's not about literacy. It's not about reading magazines and newspapers. It's about symbolic, creative, intuition thinking. How do you explain all this stuff? The skull is getting larger. The DNA is changed by 7%. The IQ is going up. It shows that we are evolving. And that genetic model, that idea that you can zap the salamander energy into frog eggs and transform them into salamanders, actually shows up in the fossil record as well. Let's look at this. This is an actual diagram built by 2 scientists, Dr. James Raup and Dr. David Sepkoski. This is from the most exhaustive collection of fossil data ever found and put together. 3,300 different genres of life in the oceans, going all the way back, as you can see on the bottom right, 250 million years ago. Now, what are we actually looking at here? The height of the graph is how many new species appear on Earth that we've never seen before. The height of the graph is new species. What we're seeing is that there are regular spikes in which sudden bursts of evolution happen across the entire planet. A massive number of species completely evolve into something new, and it's happening in a regular cycle that they estimated to be somewhere between 25 to 26 million years. Now, more recently, we have Robert Rode from UC Berkeley, who took the whole graph even further back to 542 million years ago and found a bigger cycle, a cycle of 62 million years. And you can see that it kind of breaks down once you get to this point, which was the 250 million year mark, where the other one started. It still works a little bit, but there's a new cycle that's starting to kick in there. So what's going on here? Well, what I did is I actually built this diagram where I combined the two together, showing that first it's on one cycle, and then it upshifts to another one. Well, this was one of my greatest scientific achievements. One of the things that just blew me away. As I was looking at this diagram, I'm meditating on this, I'm thinking, okay, let's look at the units of time. 62 million years, okay? There's 4 of them. What's 4 times 62? 248. What is the estimated orbit of our galaxy in millions of years? 250 million years. Only 2 million years off from this. Then we got the 26, which is really closer to 25, and there's 10 of them. And lo and behold, this is what I realized. So if you can't understand all the nuts and bolts and the numbers, check this out. Remember that I showed you this is the big payoff, folks. So if you're falling asleep from heat stroke, because it's fucking hot in here. Okay? I'm up there on the stage. You got to remember, I'm like about to freaking pass out. I think I'm doing really well under the circumstances. Thank you. And remember, I'm wearing a dress shirt. I'm not even wearing my normal linen. Oh, take it off. Yeah, that's great. That ain't going to happen. Remember I said before, this is so exciting to me, that there's geometric energy that's bending galactic arms in straight lines. And what I'm now proposing to you is that that geometry is sitting there in one place, and as the galaxy spins, it's actually moving through the geometry as the geometry sits still. So just imagine the geometry is sitting there, it doesn't move, and then as the stars go through it, they are being bent by the geometry. So they're going to make a turn that's like a 60-degree turn. They're going to go this way, and then and they go off that way because the gravitational current directs them that way. What happens when they hit one of the nodes, one of the corners of the geometry? What happens to the life on the planets of the stars in those galaxies, based on what, or the stars in that galaxy? Well, that's the diagram that we were just looking at. These are the corners of the geometry, folks. So as we hit those geometric points, they are information dense. They have information that rewrites all the DNA of all the species on Earth, which we already now know is happening because our DNA has changed by 7% in the last 5,000 years. And we're also seeing that, in fact, there is a volume of a tennis ball size that our heads have expanded by. Well, what about these people with the elongated skulls? If you were at the panel last night, Brian Forster was there, remember that? And we're talking about these people with these freaking huge skulls, like twice as big as ours in the back. Those are people that were more evolved than we are. Okay, so as we move through this geometry, it's coming up here again, we're hitting those points. Now, here's how it works. The first 4 cycles are the 4 corners of the octahedron. So now imagine that we're moving along, the star hits that corner, the galaxy rotates in 248 million years, which means it's one circle for 248. So 62 million years between this point and this point, just by dividing 248 by 4. That's how long it takes to go from point A to point B. So your star is drifting along. It hits this corner, and that's where the fractal is. That's where all the geometry is nested together. That geometry is the code that rewrites your DNA. Then these bubbles are also expanding away from the center. That's the next important thing. Galaxies are evolving. These are like the chakras of the galaxy, and they expand. The galaxy is going through a life cycle. Eventually it widens out and becomes a ring galaxy, and it pushes all the stars out to the edge. And then at that point, it actually implodes on itself, and that's when the galaxy is complete and everyone inside the galaxy has ascended. That's how this actually seems to be working. So that's a lot to take in, huh? It's like, see, this shit, it's like easy for me. Y'all are like, say what? I'll try it again. Let's say that one more time. So imagine now that these geometries are inside bubbles, okay? So the octahedron is one, and then the icosahedron is in another bubble. What's that? Oh, put some cold water. Thanks, bro. That way the speaker doesn't pass out. But it's interesting, you know, the psychedelic experience of having so much heat. It's like a sweat lodge. The Wilcock Sweat Lodge. Okay. So bubbles expanding. So that octahedron is getting larger and larger and larger. But the stars don't move. The stars are just going around in circles. Ultimately, they're going to get pushed away once it all expands, but that takes a long time. This is just how the remote viewing and the scientific deductions that I've come up with explain this. And I actually made this diagram in order to illustrate it because no such diagram existed. So these bubbles are expanding away from the center, so we are moving through, we first move through the octahedron. We go through one cycle of the galaxy. We hit all 4 corners. Oh, I thank you.
Passing on the torch.
Okay, this is going to saturate me completely, but hey, it's awesome. Thank you. All right, so the bubbles here are expanding, and then look at the icosahedron, and remember that there are 12 corners on the icosahedron. So we have the top and bottom, 1 and 2, and then we have a total of 1 pentagon on the top and 1 pentagon on the bottom, which you can actually see. So here's the 1 pentagon on the top, and here's the 1 pentagon on the bottom, right? So there's 5 up here and 5 down here. Now these form currents that exert force in a north-south direction because these are controlled by magnetic fields. The magnetic fields have field lines similar to what you see if you put iron filings on a piece of paper and you hold a magnet underneath it. Those are called lines of force or field lines. Awesome. Now I got cold water in there. I'm upping my game here, thanks to you all's help. Awesome. And I let my southern accent come out just there. You notice that? That's when you know it's really freaking hot. I grew up in New York, and I only lived in the South for 8 years, but every now and then it just pokes out. Okay, so magnetic lines of force, as we go along through the ecliptic plane, we're crossing over these ley lines, these magnetic ley lines, and they carry the information vibration, the code, from those points. So this is why, once again, oh, we didn't want that yet. This is why, once again, let's go back to the one that doesn't have the starburst in it. We see here these lines where it says 26 million year, that should actually be 25. Those lines represent the points of the geometry. Each of those corners of that icosahedron creates a magnetic field line. It's a wall that we hit as the galaxy is rotating. The 62 million year cycle is a lot easier to see because you got 1, 2, 3, 4 lines that we hit before that shape expands away and is no longer the main one influencing it. But the point is, those lines, each line represents one of those geometric node points, and it has conscious, living, divine information in it. Divine information that creates ascension. Now think about, again, the sheer number of habitable watery Earths that would be in a given galaxy. We now know it's 40 billion, right? Do you think that this system only is working on Earth? No. Every single star in that galaxy is moving through that geometry, causing the arms to bend in straight lines, as I showed you in those pictures. And when you hit the corner, when you then make a 60-degree or 90-degree turn like you do here, you're going through this information-dense area that reprograms your DNA. So the universe itself is designed to create an inevitable ascension mechanism. You have to keep moving through if you're going to stay on that planet, and if you don't stay on the planet and you haven't gotten ready to ascend yet, you have to go somewhere else. So this now is the whole scientific background for what the real goal of the talk was, is to talk about the preparation for ascension. So I want to talk to you about this concept of the DNA evolving, the consciousness evolving. Our minds are becoming more evolved. Our enlightenment is increasing. And there's yet all this stress on the earth at this time. Now we're looking at a new model of the cosmos in which geometry is fractalizing, kind of like this really cool illustration I found online. Downloaded that off of pond5.com. That's really a nice kind, it's not exactly precise. It's based on I now know it's based on an Adobe After Effects plugin called Plexus. And I could probably reconstruct this if I spent enough time, but I haven't done it yet. I know how they did it. But anyway, the point is, this is a really cool kind of dancing geometry version. It's like a visual mandala that we can meditate on, giving us an idea of how the universe is creating itself out of this geometry. And think about the idea that this geometry is all fractals of the original photon, and that is ultimately what is going on inside your cells. Your cells, your DNA, is a geometric pattern that absorbs photons. And there's new photons coming in. That's what all these esoteric teachings are telling us, that there's new photons that have new codes in them that change our DNA. Well, I just proved to you that that really works, because I showed you how it works on the galactic level, that we move through this geometry and we hit new node points. Well, Walter Cruttenden on my panel with the binary star, how many people saw the binary star panel? Raise your hand. Okay, not as many. We now know that our solar system is orbiting another star called the Black Sun. It seems to be a brown dwarf, And as we move through that star, we're moving through geometry, just like what I showed you on the galactic level. So that geometry actually is causing the same thing to happen. And when we reach the end of the cycle, we hit this wall of energy that activates DNA. Except now it's happening from a star and not on a galactic level. So this ascension process does involve some very interesting things, because not everybody gets what they're supposed to learn. This is not universal ascension. The ancient teachings, including the Tibetans, think about how many people actually ascended in the rainbow body practices. There's 160,000 documented who did it. Now that's a lot, but it's a very small percentage compared to the total number of people on Earth. So you don't get a full graduation. You don't get everybody ascending. You have to prepare for ascension. So as I said here, one of the main things I want to do in this talk, first of all, is to break down the mental conditioning and show you what I believe now is the actual fractal holographic model of the cosmos, in which this original photon creates geometry that expands out into the whole universe, and the geometry is alive and intelligent. And as you move through new areas of it, it changes your DNA structure, rewrites the code by an intelligent blueprint.